Just imagine a time when people were tortured openly on the streets as punishment for crime. Blood, pain, and fear. All this was a spectacle, a lesson for the public. Today, when we think of jail, we just see a building, right? But have you ever wondered, where did these jails come from? And why? This is a story not just of closed prisons, but of the heart of our society. Hello, friends. Welcome to the journey of a book that will challenge your thinking, discipline, and punish. The Birth of the Prison by Michel Foucault. This book is not just about prisons, but about the change that began centuries ago and still grips us today. So where did this idea of prisons come from? A few hundred years ago, things were completely different. If there was a suspect, he would be tortured in the name of investigation. And if the crime was proven, he would be punished severely in public. Sometimes even to death. All this was a way of showing the power of a king or ruler. But then suddenly something changed. The ideas of enlightenment came, the industrial age began, and the values of society went through a radical transformation. During this time, prisons were born. Those prisons that today seem so ordinary to us. But wait, this story is not so simple. According to Michel Foucault, this new form of prison, was not a big victory. Yes, punishment became a little more humane. But there was a deeper meaning hidden behind it. These prisons were not just of walls, but of a society where people were becoming slaves of the industrial machine. This new form of punishment was actually a new imprisonment, unseen, but present everywhere. So if we understand this secret of prisons, then perhaps we can also understand the foundation of our present society. Come, let's go on this journey together and see how a small thing, prison, defines our entire system. Lesson 1. Body and soul punishment. There is a crowd in the street, screaming, thirsting for blood. In front of them is a man whose body is about to be torn to pieces, and all this in the name of punishment. This is not a horror film, but 18th century Paris. But why did this painful spectacle suddenly stop? And was what came in its place really better? Let's unravel this mystery. This is the first chapter of Discipline and Punish. And from here we step into a strange world. It was March 2, 1757. There was a horrific scene on the streets of Paris. Robert Francois Damiens, a servant, was being punished for trying to attack the French King Louis V. And what punishment? His hands and feet were tied to 4 horses, each pulling in a different direction. But when the body did not come apart, the executioner took out a knife and cut the tendons. Then the horrific task was completed. Imagine how much pain, how much blood, but this was the last time such a spectacle happened. After this incident, this method of public punishment gradually ended in Europe. By the end of the 18th century, the style of punishment had changed. Now all this did not happen openly, but behind closed doors. Punishment now came with a timetable, like the gears of a machine. For example, in the 19th century, French politician Léon Fauchet created a new rulebook for the house of young prisoners in Paris. The prisoners would wake up to the sound of drums at 5 in the morning. Work would start by 5:45. Food at 10. Study at 10:40. Work again from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. And cells would be locked at 7:30 in the night. That was it. This was the new method. A schedule. A discipline. Now punishment did not mean only tormenting the body. Now it was a game of changing the heart and mind. Earlier punishment meant breaking the body of the criminal, to show him the power of the king. But now the focus was on the soul of the criminal, to control his thoughts, his will, his mind. Many historians think that this was a progress, that punishment had become less cruel. But Foucault says, wait, you are misunderstanding the matter. This change was not a victory of humanity. Actually, the purpose of punishment itself changed. Now the criminal's heart and mind were to be imprisoned, not his body. This new system was not just confined to the walls of the prison. It was about controlling how people think, how they behave. And this was just the beginning. Lesson 2. Torture as part of investigation. There was a time when torture was not just a punishment, but a path to truth. Imagine, if an official questioned you, he would take you straight to the torture table. And all this was not a dark game, it was a science, a system. But this spectacle of torture was not just for criminals, it was a display of power of a king. So why did this system change suddenly? Let's uncover the reason behind it. This is the second chapter of Discipline and Punish, where we see how torture was once not just a punishment, but the heart of investigation. It was the end of the 18th century, when the system of torture gradually started changing. But this change did not come suddenly. It was the thinking of the philosophers of the Enlightenment. For them, torture was an old, barbaric method, like part of a Gothic horror story. But wait, torture was not considered sadistic in those times. It was a science, friends. There were rules for everything. How long the rope was to be used, how many times the torture instrument would be used. Everything was fixed. And torture was not just for punishment. He was a hero in investigation too. Why? Because in those times, confession was everything. If you confessed, even if it was through torture, then the case was over, and no proof was needed. Torture was the scale of truth. Because of this, investigation and punishment became two sides of the same coin. But this was just the beginning. When it came to public punishment, it was not just for justice, it was a political drama. Every crime was considered a personal attack against the king. So giving punishment, that was the king's response, a declaration of his power. Public execution was a spectacle, in which the crowd not only watched, but also approved a king's rule. The death of the criminal was not just a punishment, but a show that the king's system was supreme. With every execution, the message was sent out. This is my justice, my will, and the crowd. They were the witness of this spectacle, its guarantor. Because a spectacle is a spectacle only when there are people to watch it. Lesson 3. Crime Society. A new justice. There was a time when crime meant treason against the king. The punishment was to dismember the person in front of everyone. But think, when this spectacle stopped, what changed? Did everything really become humane, or was a new prison born? One that was not visible but was deep. Let's take a look inside this new system. This is the third chapter of Discipline and Punish, where we will see how by the end of the 18th century, the whole style of punishment changed. People were no longer tolerating public executions and torture. The crowd started saying, "Enough. This cruelty will not be tolerated." Now the new mantra of punishment was humanity, meaning justice should be such that it is in accordance with human values. But wait, these things sound good. But in reality, this new system was not that perfect. The biggest change came in the way of investigation. Earlier, in the Middle Ages, investigation meant only to find out whether a crime was committed or not. That's it, the crime was proved. So punish. End of the matter. But now, by the end of the 18th century, this was not enough. Now the question was, why did the crime happen? Was the criminal mentally ill? Was he delusional, or maybe psychotic? Now investigation became a science, a scientifico-juridical complex, where psychiatrists and psychologists decided whether the accused should be sent to jail or a mental hospital. This change did not stop at just investigation. It changed the whole meaning of punishment. Earlier punishment was the will of the king, a show of his power. But now crime was considered an attack against society. Every crime was a wound on the body of society, and the purpose of punishment was to heal it. Now power went out of the hands of the king and came into the hands of the public. The judge, who earlier used to pronounce the verdict in the name of the king, was now replaced by many authorities, like psychiatrists, psychologists. All of them together decided what the punishment would be. Crime was now an attack against the entire society, not just against the king. And punishment? That was society's answer, its own justice. So this was a new era, where the focus of punishment shifted from the criminal's body to his being, and crime became bigger than the king. But was this really a better system? Or a new kind of imprisonment? Lesson 4. A new style of discipline. Imagine an era where a human being is not just a human being, but a part of a machine. His every step, Every moment is controlled, not just to punish him, but to make him better. This is not sci-fi, but the 17th and 18th century, when the very meaning of discipline changed. So how did all this happen? Let's open the doors to this new system. This is the fourth chapter of Discipline and Punish, where Michel Foucault takes us to what he calls the classical age, the 17th and 18th centuries. Here the whole concept of discipline changed. Earlier, punishment meant making a criminal an example in front of everyone, so that the rest would be afraid. But now the criminal had to be transformed into a docile body, that is, a person who would work quietly, become a part of the system, and be useful to the industry. This new discipline system stood on four big pillars. The first was the art of distributions. The body of a criminal was divided into a specific space. It started with enclosure, like military barracks or small cells. Separate every person, lock him in a small space. This idea probably came from monastic cells, where monks lived alone and lived their lives in discipline. Architecture also became its companion. Walls were built so that everyone remained in their place. The second pillar was control of activity. This was the game of timetables. Everything had a rhythm, a routine. Waking up in the morning, working, eating, sleeping. Everything was fixed. Religion had a hand in this too. In monasteries, time was regulated this way for centuries. The third was the organization of Genesis, a fancy name. But the simple thing is that every person's individuality was molded through a strict process. For example, think of how children in a school move from one level to another by giving exams, getting training. This process was called seriation. Every step was carefully planned, so that you progress according to the system and become a part of a larger structure. The fourth and last pillar was composition of forces. The idea was that discipline would control the behavior of the entire group, not just the time or work of an individual. Each individual's energy would be channeled so that he or she would become part of an efficient machine, like the factories of the Industrial Revolution. Now what mattered was how many people there were, where they were, not their individual strength or talent. You were a cog in the structure of a larger society. So this was a new form of discipline, where the individual was not just imprisoned, but made part of a productive, controlled machine. This system was not just confined to jails. It spread to schools, factories. Lesson 5. Disciplinary power became based on three principles: hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examination. Imagine a world where someone is watching you at every step. Your every move, every mistake is being noted. This is not a spy movie. This was the new discipline system of the 17th century. Every person became a case, who was not only controlled, but efforts were made to make him perfect. How? Through three principles. Come, let's listen to their story. This is the fifth chapter of Discipline and Punish, where Michel Foucault tells us how the new system of discipline was based on three major principles: hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examination. These three together were weaving a web that was binding every human being. The first principle was hierarchical observation, meaning everyone was under someone's watch. Think of a military camp, a perfect setup where every soldier, every officer keeps an eye on each other. It was a network of eyes, where the captain kept an eye on the tents of his juniors, and he on those below him. Everything was set according to geometry. Where the tents would be put, who would sit, where, everything was planned. This idea did not stop at the army. Gradually this system also entered the working class colonies, hospitals and schools. Now even buildings became a weapon of discipline. For example, the École of Paris, a school which was actually an observatory. Every student's room was along a corridor where the officers' quarters were. Every room had a window, so that the student always felt that someone was watching him. The second principle was normalizing judgment. This was the game of standards. Now power did not run on the will of a single person, but on fixed rules and norms. For example, grades in school, ranks in medicine, everything was based on aptitude. If someone deviated from the norm, the punishment was to bring him back in line. Repeated efforts were made to make him perfect. The third and last principle was examination. Now every person became a case, a file, which was checked again and again. Hospitals were the biggest example of this. There, patients were always examined under the doctor's eye. There every symptom was noted. Schools were not far behind. Arithmetic, spelling, handwriting, grammar, everything was measured so that the norms could be strengthened further. These three principles, observation, judgment, and examination, together created a system where man was not just imprisoned, but an attempt was made to mold him. This was a new form of discipline, where every moment, every action was monitored, and every person was made a part of the machine of society. Lesson 6, as Bentham's Panopticon demonstrated, discipline and systems of power are enforced by the constant feeling of surveillance. Imagine a place where you always feel that someone is watching you. Every moment, every breath is being watched. You don't know if that watch exists or not, but you change. You come under control. This is not a dystopian novel. This was a new form of discipline, and its biggest symbol was the Panopticon. Let's take a peek into this terrifying world. This is the 6th chapter of Discipline and Punish, where Michel Foucault shows us a world where discipline meant surveillance. The story begins from the end of the 17th century, when plague was wreaking havoc in Europe. When there was a suspicion of plague in a city, the entire city would go into lockdown. The rules were strict. Every family was ordered to stay indoors, otherwise they would be sentenced to death. There was an official for every street, called a syndic. This syndic would lock every door, and every morning he would shout down the street and call the people of every house to the window. If no one was seen at the window, then understand, he either fell to the plague or is dead. This syndic would give his report to the intendants, who would take the matter further to the magistrates. See? A whole system was created, a chain of command where everyone kept an eye on everyone. This chaos of the plague, ironically, became the blueprint for a perfect control system. And it awakened a dream in the minds of some people, a society where everything was disciplined, perfectly governed. The biggest symbol of this dream was the Panopticon, an idea given by philosopher Jeremy Bentham in 1787. Think of a strange building in the shape of a donut. In its center is a tower, whose every window looks into the inside of this donut. And this donut, it's made of tiny cells, one prisoner in each cell. One that looks into the tower. One that looks into the tower. And the other that looks out. What was the magic of this design? Each prisoner felt that he was always being watched. Anyone could see them from the tower, and they could not know if someone was watching or not. So what would they do? They kept themselves under control, as if there was always someone watching. This was completely different from the old dungeons, where the prisoner was locked in the dark. In the Panopticon, the prisoner became his own jailer, simply by feeling that he was watched. This was a new form of discipline, the fear of the gaze, which kept people under control without any force. So the Panopticon was not just a building, it was a thought, a way to control society. And this thought gradually penetrated our schools, offices, and every corner of life. Lesson 7. Prisons were designed to deprive liberty and ready individuals for discipline in the industrial age. Imagine a world where the idea of prison was a completely new one. Today, prison seems so normal to us, like an obvious answer to crime. But at the beginning of the 19th century, it was a revolutionary idea. So why did prison become the ultimate form of punishment? Was it just for incarceration, or was there something more to it? Let's unravel the mystery. This is the 7th chapter of Discipline and Punish, where Michel Foucault tells us how prison became not just a punishment, but a major part of discipline in the industrial age. Today, prison seems like a common thing to us. Commit a crime, send them to prison. But at the beginning of the 19th century, this idea was a completely new one. Earlier, punishment meant public execution or torture, but now prison has overtaken everything. And there was a reason for this. Away the criminal's freedom. But this idea only worked when society considered freedom a universal right, at least for those who were full citizens. So taking away freedom became an egalitarian punishment. That is, equal for everyone. Jail was the perfect tool for that, but the benefits of prison do not end here. In prison, punishment could be measured in terms of time. Days, months, years. 1 day's imprisonment or 7 years. Everything is clear. But prison was not just about taking away freedom. It had another purpose: to make the criminal better. How? Through isolation and solitude. Imagine a criminal alone in his cell with his crime. The idea was that he would remember his deed, feel ashamed, and change his heart. His own conscience would reform him. Along with this, prisoners were given work, forced labor. It sounds noble that work would improve their character. But Foucault says, wait, it's not that simple. This work of the jail was not giving any economic benefit, nor were the prisoners learning any real skills. Then why this work? Actually, this work was to make them a part of the industrial system. In jail they learned how to live a routine, how to become part of the production regime. There was no difference between a prisoner and a factory worker. Both were small cogs in an industrial machine. Jail was not just a punishment but a training ground, where a person was made accustomed to discipline, so that he could fit into the larger system of society. So this was the real story of jail, a place that took away freedom, but at the same time prepared a person for the industrial world. But was this reform or another kind of control? Final summary. So friends, this was the story of Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault, a journey that brought us from the spectacles of the 18th century to today's disciplined society. You heard how once upon a time the punishment for crime was to break the body of the criminal in public, in front of everyone, as a spectacle of fear. But by the end of the 18th century, all this changed. Now the target of punishment was not the body of the criminal, but his heart and mind. He was no longer considered the enemy of the king, but the enemy of the entire society. The criminal was made a small part of a big social machine. Jail was no longer just a prison. It was a factory where a person was observed, controlled, and made a perfect disciplined person for the industrial age. Surveillance, timetables, examinations, these all became tools of the system that still holds us captive. Foucault forces us to think, was this discipline really progress, or a new kind of imprisonment? This story is not just about prisons, it is the story of our society, our thinking. So the next time you feel bound in a system, be it school, office, or any other place, stop for a moment and think, is this also part of the same discipline that began centuries ago? We are glad that you completed this journey with us. If you like these insights of Discipline and Punish, can you do a small favor? Tell us your opinion. Just leave a comment and write Discipline and Punish. Also subscribe to the channel if you found the video even a little informative.